In a world of celebrity apologists, we are a small-time voice, but we're making a big-time noise for the kingdom of God. We are the Mentionables. And now, here's the team.
Hello, welcome, Mentioners. We're back to doing normal episodes, if anything about our episodes can be considered normal. On today's Mentionables, is God my imaginary friend? Also, theology or pizza parties? Which one's lacking in the modern church? I'm Joel Fergus.
And I'm Nick Peters.
Nick, how about that conference?
I thought it was a really good one. I've missed doing the show since then, but it was an honor to get to be there.
Oh, heck yeah. No, I something really special happened when we all got together.
Mm-hmm.
I for just a couple of random people I tagged on Facebook, I didn't realize it would be such a cohesive and well-rounded team.
Well, apparently it is.
Apparently.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's God for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so today I'd like to talk about this frequent comparison that's drawn between God and imaginary friends. For instance, there's an advertisement I found on a site called Kids Without God. It showed a 12-year-old girl giving a coy eye roll toward a cartoon hand coming out of the cloud saying, "I'm getting a bit too old for imaginary friends." I'll quote a post I found on Christian forums. It says, "Can someone give me a consistent methodological way of determining the difference between God and an imaginary friend? Someone says that they have an imaginary friend who they talk to, who sometimes does things for them and who makes them feel happy and fulfilled and comforts them. How is this different than God? This is primarily an epistemological question. In order for me to believe in God, I need to be able to distinguish between this God character and an imaginary friend character," end quote. This clearly is a common comparison being drawn, and at least some seems to think it's has some logical force to it. Right?
Right.
After all, there is a recognized mechanism by which people are known to believe in beings who unambiguously do not exist. And doesn't this give us precedent that might explain belief in God? If we can explain the belief in God in a way that doesn't require him to exist, we've got the start of a good case against him existing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was primarily prompted into researching this by a question of the week that we received back in March. You answered the question too, Nick. You remember this one about imaginary friends?
No, I don't.
All right. Well, essentially, the guy asked, he's got an atheist friend that says talking to God is like talking to an imaginary friend. And he asked us to answer that one for him. I think you went more the route of, how the church tends to unintellectualize thing. You brought up the book that you've been pitching about how men don't like to go to church.
Right. Why men hate going to church. David Morrow, I believe, wrote it.
Right. And you managed to connect it to this idea that talking to God is like talking to an imaginary friend. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming you went the sort of touchy-feely emotional route.
Yes. I've noticed the church seems to do that quite often, and for many of us, it doesn't connect at all. In fact, what you're talking about reminds me of how most young people, their version of Christianity is called moral therapeutic deism.
Oh, yeah. Oof, we could do a whole other episode on that alone.
Mm-hmm. But tune in to our next episode where we talk about moral therapeutic deism.
Yeah, so that sounds like a barrel of monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Come on along. All right, now I really like this topic because I'm the psych guy, and I chose to look into the studies behind imaginary friend phenomena and then compare it to religious belief. I think I can make the case that belief in invisible friends is so completely different than religious belief that the two really aren't even worthy of comparison. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk cold, hard data. Imaginary friend phenomena, or IFP, occurs in about 37% of kids. So that's definitely not all kids, but it's about a third of all kids. Roughly speaking, 1 in 3 kids is likely to have an imaginary friend, which is more than I would have guessed.
In fact, I think you still have your imaginary friend, don't you, Joel?
Well, actually, I've been told by my parents that I did have an imaginary friend, but I don't remember anything about it. They told me last time when I was a kid and I stopped playing with them, they asked me where he had gone, and I told them that he'd gone to the moon. So, hence my lifelong ambition to be an astronaut, I suppose.
Mm.
But barring that, I'll settle for a space case.
Okay. How about Space Force?
Ooh. I've been waiting for that to happen since I was like 6. With like a cardboard box on the head and a hole punched out in the front of the helmet. I was Space Force back then.
Mm.
Anyway, there's a smaller group of kids, about 70%, who like to dial it up to 11 and create a whole paracosm. A paracosm is essentially a whole imaginary universe populated by imaginary friends and imaginary towns and imaginary worlds and so forth. Kind of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on steroids.
Mm.
Geez, will anybody get a Mr. Rogers reference? Aren't they doing like a movie on him?
I haven't heard that.
Like a documentary or something? I don't know. It's been floating around the Facebooks, and you know how you can believe everything you read there.
Of course you can.
Right. So, as far as imaginary friends go, you've got personified objects, like a stuffed animal, and then there's the invisible kind. When a kid personifies an object, they usually treat it like a pet or like it's their baby. And then with the invisible people kind, they usually treat it more like a peer. Now, I should say that when a kid makes up an invisible friend, they're usually pretty original about it. I mean to say that they don't go around saying, hey, I'm talking to Elmo over here. You know, they actually make up their own person and give it its own name and its own characteristics, you know, because if it works out, they don't want to be in violation of copyright. They want something they can market themselves later on. So, think like that.
I hadn't considered a kid ever wanting to make something real like that, but okay.
At the risk of going personal here, when I was a kid, I made an effort not to pretend to be actual superheroes from comic books because, you know, I fully intended to create my own comic books at some point, and I didn't want to be in copyright violation. So I actually did that.
Mm. How's that coming along?
I made the comics, but nobody ever purchased them. So.
You're sitting here doing podcasts with us, so you're living the dream.
My dreams of being an artist didn't work out. Well, it depends. Is art the capacity to do it, or is it the marketing thereof?
I think it's the capacity to do it.
Okay, then I'm an artist.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, okay?
Hey, Tyler keeps telling the story about the way that we met online was that he requested somebody on Apologetics Alliance to do a cartoon for him, a presuppositional cartoon for him, which I then volunteered to do.
Okay.
I totally remember that. I remember somebody asking for that, me volunteering and drawing the cartoon and so forth. I didn't, until he mentioned it, I didn't realize that was Tyler I did that for.
I met Tyler when someone started talking about David McAfee.
Classic. Anyway, let's stop talking about other mentionables.
They're not worth mentioning right now.
But we could always talk about Ben.
Sure.
You could mention him.
He's not mentionable, is he?
No, it's true. All right, that fulfills our quota of mentionable puns for this episode. Continuing with the invisible friend phenomenon, the IFP. All right, so some common things. Usually kids interact physically with invisible friends. So like I read about a kid that started crying when the mom pulled out of the driveway because her imaginary friend was standing there and the mom had backed over it. To the kid, this was a physical being capable of being hurt. And you'll see, you know, them saying, he hit me, or, you know, getting in flat fights or so forth with their invisible friend. Kids also tend to have arguments and conversations with their invisible friends. So when I say that, what I mean is that they talk to their invisible friend, and in their mind, the friend answers back to them. So they're having a back and forth conversation, not just, you know, talking to air. Well, they are talking, but in their mind, it's a conversation.
Right.
All right, so I'll quote a psychologist who actually is the foremost expert in invisible friends, who says, children vividly experience interactions with their invisible friends, but they almost always know that these friends aren't real. Looking into transcripts of interviews of 86 children with invisible friends, Taylor and her colleagues found that 77% of these children said yes when they were asked if they had a pretend friend, and 40% spontaneously remarked at some point during the interview that they were talking about a pretend friend. The children offered statements such as, "Her is a fake animal. I just made him up in my head," and "He's not in real life." Only one child was adamant that her invisible friend was real. End quote. All right, so atheists ought to love this one, though. Sometimes teenagers will invent imaginary friends, too. And research has gone as far as to suggest that if can be found in adults to an extent. And the example they cite in this research is authors who say that they interact with and speak.
Hello? Hello? Joe?
With the characters they're writing about.
Joe, you kind of went out for quite a while there. Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello?
I don't know what happened, but you blanked out for quite a bit. I was saying hello, 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 and you.
Yeah, well, I got a call in that interrupted our call.
Great.
Put the call on hold, but I could not figure out how to take our call off hold.
Yeah. Well, you be sure to get after Todd over that one later on, okay?
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So can we just pick up where we left off and then splice the recordings together?
Yeah.
All right, will do. All right, you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So why do people make up imaginary friends? Research suggests that it's probably a method of learning or a coping mechanism. So far as learning is concerned, imaginary play or conversations can help them think through social interactions and problem solving. They're basically role-playing their way through various challenges that they make up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you more commonly find if in only children or oldest children or kids who don't watch TV much. And it yields results too. Kids who make up friends usually have better vocabulary and are less shy, and they have a greater capacity for empathy. When I was taking educational theory and developmental psychology in college, one of the things we know is that various people have various styles of learning. So there's a bunch of, you've got people who are musically inclined to learn. You've got people who are the typical thing, the visual, auditory, kinetic, that kind of thing. But one of the types of learning that we studied was called interpersonal, which means that these individuals learn best through interacting with other people. ISP seems to be a strong candidate for interpersonal learning because you're essentially creating a person to interact with so that you can basically teach yourself things, which would explain why oldest children and only children are more likely to make up invisible. So here's the thing. Imaginary friends go away. 100% of the time, people with invisible friends eventually stop playing with them, and a significant number of them forget they even had a friend. So
Hello?
wife keeps calling me and interrupting us. I told her that she was doing that, so this should be the last time that happened.
Okay. Let's make sure it's recording things still going. Okay, let's keep going again.
All right. I'm fairly sure this is the last time that's going to happen.
I hope so.
So apparently I had an imaginary friend when I was a kid. I know this because my parents once told me, and because I'm super smart.
You keep telling yourself that, okay?
Now, my friend keeps telling me that.
Mm.
I've got some really early childhood memories, but absolutely none of them include the imaginary friend. So I totally forgot about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you, Nick, you ever have an imaginary friend?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that I'm your friend?
Yeah. Boy, I'm really fooling myself here, aren't I?
Okay.
But
so,
then again, you did get me to meet Tyler, so now I'm starting to rethink that.
yeah, that's not something a friend would do, right?
Yeah.
All right, the psychologist that I quoted earlier, who has put a considerable amount of study into IF, finally concluded that, quote, invisible friends are an especially compelling and involved form of pretend play, end quote. So there's a money quote. In a nutshell, that's invisible friend phenomena. How does that compare to belief in God in your estimation, Nick?
It really doesn't. I mean, people do grow out of imaginary friends, such, but interestingly, people seem to grow into the idea of God many times. That's why adults like Alistair McGrath, C.S. Lewis, J. Warner Wallace, and Lee Strobel come to faith later in life.
Yeah, no, that's a solid point. Now, I mean, you know, if I approach this completely with my skeptical goggles on,
Mm-hmm.
You know, I assume from the outset that God is not real, and therefore, you know, I try to draw the comparison between the invisible friend phenomena and belief in God, and you know, even beginning with the assumption that these people believe in something that's not there, that they're talking to someone who's imaginary, there's still very little, if any, parallel that you can draw between belief in God and imaginary friend phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that kills it right up front for me is that people who display IFP are almost always completely aware that they're pretend playing. You know,
Right.
Arguably they always are, because the one kid they interviewed that said, no, it's real, could easily have been just saying that to fool the adults, to try to draw them into a pretend world. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But that was a complete outlier, and everybody else is fully aware that they're talking to an imaginary person that they made up.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say that 100% of people who believe in God believe that he actually exists, not
Right.
that they're pretending he exists.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why we have atheists, because if God was just a pretend person people were just playing around with, at no point would they say, dang it, I believe there isn't a God.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of like the opposite of presuppositionalist. You know, at heart, we all disbelieve in God.
I actually have referred to atheists many times as partaking in a presuppositional atheism. It's kind of the whole thing again of, well, belief in God is stupid. I don't believe in God. Therefore, I am rational. Any thought that I have is rational. Anyone who disagrees with me on this is irrational. I don't think God exists. Therefore, that's a rational opinion.
And there's always the, you know, that atheism is the default position that everyone's born into, right?
Yeah, but some of us grow out of it later on.
Sure. You know, like you said, they grow into belief in God.
Mm-hmm.
So you're comparing childhood pretend play, the most naive and uninformed kind of play there is, with adults who develop whole systems of thought and theology around a God that they actually believe in, and not in a naive way. You know, it would be naive if, well, all right, let's be honest. There are some Christians that are fairly naive about their belief in God.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll talk about that in your section, right?
Yeah, probably will. Yeah. And, I'm still thinking that even still, that men especially, we still like to pretend many times. The thing is, we all know we're doing it. I mean, when Christmas time comes around, have two guys walk through a department store together. Then they come across some of the rows of gift wrap and such. Here's what would evidently happen. They will each pour out a roll of gift wrap and start having a sword fight one another with it. Or picture guys at a big sporting event. They will act like they are the best athletes out there. They know they're pretending and such, but hey, and heck, my wife and I have she's a big anime fan, and we've gone to anime conventions together, and there's people cosplaying there. Everyone knows they're pretending.
Yeah, no, pretend play, almost never goes away because even, your elderly folk will sit around and role play, I don't know, politics or something with each other. It's just the most basic form of human interaction is to suspend disbelief, transcend to some form of imaginary interaction with each other or just by themselves. I mean, you'll sit around imagining things till the day you die.
Right.
In a sense, imagination is a sophisticated form of problem solving, problem solving essentially, because you will set up challenges for yourself, and then you'll use your mind to work through those challenges and solve the puzzles. So it's a self-challenge. So yeah, the imagination forms a very crucial role in human development. I would say it's one of the things that makes us human. The capacity to, create scenarios in our mind and be able to suspend disbelief in order to work through those scenarios. And so, if you look at the psychology, pretend play is actually a very important system in childhood development. Children who don't pretend become underdeveloped.
And play is still essential for us, even as adults. I wish I could find a reference, but even Aquinas said years ago says that mankind needs to play from time to time so that we can better refresh our minds for the intellectual work that needs to be done later on. But we need to play.
Who was this, Aristotle?
Aquinas.
Aquinas. I need to find that reference too, because now I can, justify my video game addiction to my wife.
Now you think that's probably a good idea, except my wife has the same interests as me, so it's okay.
All right. In the interest of honesty, I really don't play video games except on my cell phone.
Well, in the interest of honesty, I play video games off my cell phone. We got a DS, PS4. Love to get a Nintendo Switch. If anyone out there is listening and wants to be generous.
Yeah. Well, I remember back in the day when I was a bachelor, I had like a whole LAN network hooked up in my apartment with like 6 computers running simultaneously. And there was a rotating cast of friends of mine that were at these monitors at any given time. And there was like this nonstop game of like Unreal Tournament or StarCraft or something going on.
Were these real friends or imaginary ones?
Well, how would I know? I didn't make them up. I wasn't pretending.
Did you bribe them?
One of them kept stealing my stuff, so I'm pretty sure they were real.
So, anyway, we should probably then get back to what was being said, though.
All right. The second point that I wanted to make is if you really think that God doesn't exist, you have to at least allow that he isn't something that each individual completely makes up in their own mind. Religious groups all believe in the same God, who share the same characteristics and work in the same way. So this is a corporate belief. Even if it's imaginary, it's something that's created together. And, I learn about my God. I don't make everything up about him. So if he's imaginary, it's an imaginary process that's been going on for millennia now. And I'm just a reciprocal of a much larger imagining of people. So again, from the skeptical perspective, it still doesn't compare.
Right.
You can't compare the God of Christianity, a organized religious system that's the largest organized system in the world, with one kid making up a pretend friend.
Right.
Now, whereas a child will treat their imaginary friend like a peer, interact with the friend physically, and talk back and forth with the friend, two-way conversation, the religious worshiper treats God as a superior, doesn't claim any kind of physicalism for God, and prayer operates nothing like the sort of back and forth banter that one has with an invisible friend.
Unfortunately, I know too many Christians who do seem to treat prayer that kind of way. I get awfully concerned when I hear people talk. Now, you listen to hear what God is saying back to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like a transcendental meditation form of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you contemplate your navel long enough, you're going to hear that internal voice who's going to sound a lot like you.
Yeah.
But that's not, you know, I've heard of that kind of thing, but it's not something I run into with people I talk to very much.
Mm.
So I'm sure it's out there, but I would say it's less common than, you know, the form of prayer that I am familiar with, which is where you express things to God, worship, needs, gratitude, that kind of thing. And then you read scripture in order to discern God's will.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's something with where I live, because that's the kind of thing that I seem to encounter quite often.
Okay, yeah, I get that. It could be regional. You're more Bible Beltish than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, yeah, I could see that. Culturally, you're in a different culture based on your location than I am, so seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, that was the part that really killed me in that book that we wrote, was the one question, well, that one series of questions where he was talking about prayer. Every single question was like, well, you're hearing this voice in your head, and that's psychotic. And, you know, to me, I'm like, who thinks that? But apparently you know a lot of people that do.
Yes, I unfortunately do, and I keep trying to tell them you shouldn't be presenting things like this, but it doesn't seem to do any good.
All right. Well, the last point I have is that even if belief in God were to go away, because, you know, 100% of people stop believing in their pretend friend eventually.
Mm-hmm.
They stop, well, you know, arguably they never believed, but they stop playing with the pretend friend. That game is over eventually and they move on. In the religious world, even if you stop believing in God, and you know that I've done a whole series of now about Christians that have turned atheists, or I'm in the process of that series at the very least. I haven't completed it yet, but the one thing that I can tell you, 100% of them will sit there and tell you exactly what they believed, how they felt. You know, they definitely remember believing in God, worshiping God, and remember that entire process. It doesn't disappear from their memory when they stop believing.
Right.
Versus imaginary friends, which very frequently do. At the very least, it's kind of a ghost of an imagining that they have. They're like, yeah, I remember something. His name was something, I think. You know, they remember remembering. It's kind of like if your parent told you a story about something that happened to you as a child, and you remember that it happened because of the story, not because you actually remember what happened.
Right. I've got stories my parents have told about me when I was 3 years old and such, and I have no memory of it happening, but that's what they say.
You remember the story about the thing. You don't remember the actual thing, and that's how even people who do remember their invisible friends, they more remember the stories about the invisible friends rather than the actual experience of playing with them.
That makes sense.
Like the elephant guy in Inside Out.
Never saw it, unfortunately. My wife would love to see it, but we've never gotten around to it.
Yeah, Allie would like that movie. But, yeah, actually, there's a lot of things Allie would like about that movie now that I think about it. It delves into a lot of the, you know, things about how emotions affect us and how, you know, they're all important and stuff that she's really into. And I think that she'd get a kick out of that movie. So, At any rate, yeah, there's an imaginary friend in that the kid forgot about,
Mm-hmm.
playing with when she was a very young child, and somehow in this journey through her brain and her mind, they dig up the imaginary friend.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't need to sit here and tell you the entire plot of that. There's other things we need to talk to you about.
Right. I'm guessing that brings me to my section, doesn't it?
Well, let's see. I had a close up that I wanted to do.
Go ahead and close.
Okay. Where was I? I was talking about religion and comparing it to. So it's this thing about forgetting. It's important because if the IFP is a psychological phenomena, which is a mechanism of development, it's pretty telling that the mind discards of them almost entirely once their job is done. The mind doesn't create or discard God in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So he's definitely not the same kind of a psychological phenomena. All right. That's the end of my section. Any final thoughts on that, Nick?
Nope. But I think it's a great segue, actually, to my section, because...
Yeah, you're going to talk about theology. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, very good for your first time.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, my wife has been exploring Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy both because she thinks there's something missing in her life, and I think ultimately what you just need is to go deeper with what you already have, but I think she needs to find that out more on her own. But we've gone to Catholic churches and Orthodox churches. We're actually just one of each, but we've gone to them since then, and I'm not at all thinking about converting and such. I mean, I can like some of the things that I see, but I think there's a whole lot of traditions added on that I really don't see as being historical and such. But what I do think is that a lot of times people go from a sort of Protestant light to a tradition that really does try to go deeper than we do, sadly. And that should be to our shame, because really we don't take things as seriously as we should. I mean, so much of our sermons in churches seem to be more centered on, like, here's how you go to be a good person and such, instead of really exploring the faith traditions that we have. And this should be something across the board with Orthodox, Protestants, and Catholics everywhere. And we don't see it. I mean, like you said, we have pizza parties going on constantly. I did a talk once at the Defend the Faith conference in New Orleans. I was asked to come and talk about evangelism for the youth and such. And I said, that's put a list of comparison. What are the things we do at our church to attract youth? And we have the same kind of things. We go to concerts. We have pizza parties. We play laser tag. We go bowling. Now, I'm not saying this is always wrong and such. Of course not. But it does seem to be the brunt of what we do. And so, okay, now let's talk about what is it that when our kids go to college, what kind of things they get offered. So how about you, Joe? How about you tell me some of the things that kids get offered when they go off to college? What does the world offer them?
Okay, well, if you're asking about the things that they tend to start to enjoy in college that they probably didn't before, then, I remember I went to a small Christian college, and I'd lose a couple of buddies every Saturday night going out to clubs and, maybe to the watering hole, despite the fact that they weren't quite of the correct age to go there. I don't think that any of my guys, the friends I had in college, got into the, drug scene, or I am absolutely 100% that some of them were.
But you're talking about
delicately.
You're talking about a Bible college, though. I think you said. What if we were talking about like a secular college?
Well, I think the answer is in the first part of that word, secular college.
Yeah. Honestly, what they'll be offered is sex, alcohol, partying, drugs.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Right.
Yeah, pretty much.
Up,
and I just go to these people and say, which one of these do you think is more appealing to our youth? And the church is losing that one. And the thing is, we have so much theology we could offer, and we don't really teach theology. God's more just an aid to help you live a good life. He's not someone to know and worship himself. And I really don't leave church services often and think about how great and awesome God is. And so many guys are sitting there, for instance, they're thinking, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch when I get home, or I wonder what's going on in that big game this evening. I could be sitting there, and I mean, it's not because I don't care about God, it's just because the preacher is just so uninteresting to me. And the way he's presenting it, I could just be thinking, I wonder what game I'll play when I get home. Things like that. Because, I mean, if we had to go say that God is what we usually have presented to us in our churches, we probably wouldn't care much about God. And maybe that's why we don't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. And I think that may be one of the reasons that your mainline denominations are quickly dying off, is that they're so desperate to discard theology in favor of, cultural relativism. Relativity? Not relativity.
Relevance.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Relevance.
Yeah, relevance. Cultural relevance. So yeah, they're discarding theology for cultural relevance, and they're dying because what does a church have to offer if it discards the churchiness?
Right.
There are actually people who are out there seeking the kinds of things that the traditional church has always offered. Especially new parents. I saw this when I was doing my conversion case study for atheists that became Christian, is that a lot of these hardcore atheists would actually start attending church with their kids just because they wanted their kids to have some kind of foundation for ethics and virtue.
That's really pretty interesting. That, main thing I think about church, though, is we have to offer what people can't get anywhere else. And that's the truth about Christ. If we're not offering that, we're essentially just a social club. And there is a rich, rich theological tradition. I mean, many of us don't really have, sadly, a doctrine of God, as it were. We just have ideas, and God is pretty much there to give us warm fuzzies, and that's about it.
Yeah. Well, I talk about this probably too much at this point, but this kind of study that I've done now about the whole why are atheists more intelligent than Christians thing, it boils down to this, that the church used to be this the bedrock of the academy, right? You've got all of the Ivy League schools were started as Christian institutions. Round about the medieval period going up to about the Enlightenment, the church was the foundation behind education, behind science, behind intellectual pursuits, those kinds of things. So there was no lack of intellect being represented in the church. Then you've got the Enlightenment period when the academy began to drift away from theology and try to pursue more of a secular understanding of the world. And then you have, following that, the Great Revival, which is kind of this emotional call back to God. And at that point, you've got the academy become a very much a secular institution, which attempts to disseminate knowledge removed from any kind of metaphysics or transcendence. And then you've got the church, who kind of swings to the other extreme. Now they're the enemy of the academy in people's minds. And so they abandon intellectualism and they start offering this sort of heady, emotional reaction. So you've got this kind of ecstatic worship experience, especially in more of your Pentecostal churches, which definitely appeals to people, and it meets a certain need. But then if you look at the research now, it shows that people who are very intuitive in their tendencies and thinking tend to be very religious. People who are analytical in their tendencies and thinking tend to be non-religious. Why do you think that is? Is it because religion, or is it because of the institutions at this point?
I'd say it's because of the institutions.
I agree. I think that the church, in reaction to the Enlightenment movement more than anything, had gone to the end of really appealing to the intuition, appealing to the emotions. And there is some legitimacy in that because it attracts a certain crowd. But now you've got people bifurcated. You've got people who actually really want the intellectual things that the church had to offer for millennia, and now it's dropped the ball and it's not offering them.
In fact, I'm thinking a couple of things. First off, we know that with this light study and such, this emotional draw and easy believism, as we could say, that did eventually lead to groups being founded like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, because there were communities that they didn't have any root, and it was very easy for heresies to rise up and such.
Well, honestly, arguably, the Mormon church was started as a big con. Somebody was taking advantage of people who were with the, quote, easy believism. This whole blind faith kind of thing, the guy capitalized on it, and he was a genius in it. If you've read the Book of Mormon, this guy preaches like a prairie revivalist.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have been able to have happened so well, I think, if the people had been well grounded in what they believe. And then the second thing is, I'm sure you've experienced this too, that we go to our churches and people like you and I, many Christians tend to look down on us and feel sorry for us because we're so intellectual and obviously we're really missing out on God, and we need to use our hearts more than our heads.
So yeah, you've got that. And as a teacher, I can say, I've taught both the high school and middle school levels, and there is a certain, especially in the school that I taught in, it's not cool to be smart. If you're actually interested in learning, if you're invested in what the school has to offer, kids will find you intimidating, and they'll think you're better than them, or they'll think you think you're better than them. And so, you start to, they start to avoid any kind of investment in learning because that would push them out of their peer group.
And I'm actually convinced that many pastors are scared. I've told Harry this, they're scared to have someone like you or I come to their church because we are educated in what we believe, and I think many times they're scared to have us speak or do presentations because they could lose an audience that way if someone knows things more than they do. I mean, I hate to think that way, but that's honestly how I see it.
Yeah, honestly, I was thinking about that when we had our conference, that among the things that really clicked there was you had a bunch of guys like us who, exactly what you're saying. You come out of a church environment where you kind of have to be careful about the way in which you let your religion show, right? And now you come into a crowd of people who all have the same kind of general intellectual slant as you. They're interested in a particular aspect of theology and the pursuit thereof, and they've been starved for a good face-to-face conversation about it.
Yeah, and like I said, I disagree with the Ever traditions. Of course, I see them as Christians. I just don't think the claims are as historical as Everest. But, when you sign up to join one of their churches and such, they spend about a year working with you and getting you to know what the church believes and why. And we really don't do that kind of thing that often. We just get people down there, have them say the prayer, and off they go. There's really no emphasis on discipleship at all. And I was telling some people in the Celebrate Recovery recently, my wife and I go back and I said, you know what? I really do not like the word converts. I don't like it. I said, because the Bible never tells us to go out and make converts. It tells us to go out and make disciples.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Nick, this is really tapping into my training in educational theory, because one of the big problems that the academy, I'll say it like that because this transcends just a school, has had, is that you've got these people that come in to learn from you, and you've got a very mixed audience. You've got people with various capacities and people with other capacities. They've got different learning styles, etc. And so the trend for ever now has been to teach towards the middle, so to speak, which is to say that you try to hit the lowest common denominator, teach in a way that your graspers can possibly grasp, and your leaners can lean down and get the knowledge, and it's there as as Goldilocks as you can possibly make it. And this has become a problem and has always been. It's just not that they've noticed it. And the solution is to you make the learner do the work. You don't do the work for them. So you teach above the middle. You teach in a way that challenges them, and they reach towards the knowledge, and that helps them to grow because now they're doing the work. And I wonder if we were to transplant that model from educational theory into the church, how that might help.
I know sometimes when some people come to me with apologetics questions, I don't give them the answers immediately. I guide them to how I think they can best find the answers on their own. I mean, it's the whole thing, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime. And, something else I'm thinking with all this, too, is that, you and I are both married, and we got to know the women we were marrying before we married them. And I think most Christians would agree it'd be foolish to meet someone and then just right out say, hey, let's get married. And that's it. Say, no, you have to really know this person you're forming a relationship with and such. And I agree, definitely, you do. But then we talk about the God of the universe, and you don't really need to know that much about him at all. And that should be the being in this world that we should know the very most about and be the most serious about. And it seems like God's the person we're the least serious about.
Yeah, because, due to this kind of terror that people now have of politics and religion, it's just become so uncomfortable that you remove it from everyday life and you try to make everyday life as sterile and neutral as possible. And that includes not transplanting your religious beliefs into your daily life. That's to save the sermon for Sunday.
There was a story about G.K. Chesterton that he was given a writing job at the newspaper he came to work at. He was told, you can write about anything you want as long as it's not politics or religion. And he said, those are the only things worth writing about.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to jump on the, hey, everybody here share your politics train. I'm sure that's already happening in this country. I am not a politician. I'm an apologist. So.
Yeah, I'm very happy in my partisanism and such, but those of us who are, I think we need to do a whole lot better job. We were watching a video today of an Orthodox priest talking about the differences between Orthodoxy and evangelicalism. And he said, in Orthodoxy, the Bible is studied in the context of the church, in the historical learning of the church and such. In evangelicalism, it's more opening up a passage. What does this mean to me? And I hate to say it, but that's usually the way it is in our churches. We focus on what does the Bible mean to me instead of going and saying, what has historically been said about this passage? What do the leading scholars in the field think about this passage? You have this idea that, the Holy Spirit is supposed to tell you what the passage means, but if that's the case, then I'd say it looks like the Holy Spirit isn't getting his story straight because so many people seem to disagree on what he's saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? I don't have the data to back this up, but I have a firm theory about this, and that is that, if you went into a Christian bookstore, say, 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
You'd find maybe 2 apologetics books on the shelf, one by C.S. Lewis and then Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Right.
And that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you walk into a Christian bookstore, if they exist anymore, I don't know, you're going to find at least a wall devoted to apologetics.
I was thinking you might find a bookshelf devoted. It's usually not as prominent still. I mean, I'll grant you it's better than it is, but it sure needs to be a whole lot better. I mean, usually you'll find the junk food right up front on display. The apologetic stuff, it's buried somewhere in the back and such.
Well, and, okay, so there's, 30 years ago, if you asked a person to name a famous apologist,
Mm-hmm.
they may not have been able to name anybody, or it might have been C.S. Lewis, but that's about it. Nowadays, if I grab a churchgoer and ask them to name a famous apologist, they'll be able to give me at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
And a really informed person could list off dozens of them.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that there's been a huge revival in the field of apologetics,
Mm-hmm.
Which started, like 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it was, in my opinion, a reactionary response to the new atheism.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do think we are entering a golden age of apologetics and such. I mean, there's more evidence than ever before, and I know, for instance, in New Testament studies, we're getting more and more. I mean, the things that New Testament scholars will grant about Jesus today are incredible compared to what would have been granted 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the point I was eventually getting to is, yes, we had this reactionary response. There's been a revival in apologetics. As you said, we're in a golden age, but I think it's stuck. Because honestly, when I go to, I kind of have to scrounge to find a new atheist anymore.
Uh-huh.
They're not as prominent as they used to be. But apologetics is stuck. There's still this real thirst and need for it, and I think that it's possibly because people were very thirsty for the kind of intellectual pursuits that apologetics bring to Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can pick up a book on apologetics, get hooked, and a week later you're reading hardcore theology, not just apologetics, but real theology.
Yeah. I found that when I got into apologetics, that's when I started taking theology a lot more seriously. I mean, if anyone knows my story, I was wrestling with depression and anxiety very much at the time, and then I found apologetics, and that changed my outlook. I mean, of course, I still have struggles sometimes with a sort of depression and sometimes with anxiety and such, but it is nowhere near like what it was, and I say that's because of apologetics. Apologetics taught me the truth about God, that it wasn't just this was something real, it really happened. And I like to get people, I mean, like, picture going to see the Star Wars movies, for instance. Mm-hmm. Now imagine that somehow you found out those weren't just movies, that those events actually really did happen, that there really is such a thing as the force and things like that. I guarantee you, the world will change immediately for you if you come to believe that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and then you invest yourself in it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying is that apologetics, the church has been so thirsty for so long for the intellectual side of Christianity that apologetics has really come, it came as a defense against certain attacks against the faith, and it stuck because of the teaching. It takes everything that I believe as a Christian and props it up with actual philosophical and scholarly and even scientific realities. So it starts connecting those dots between this isolated belief I have and the rest of the world.
Yeah, the thing is, though, it's, we still need to get the message out there because there are still too many Christians that honestly don't have a clue about what apologetics is and what a difference it makes. And they usually don't care. That is until their kid comes home from college and declares, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm an atheist." And then all of a sudden they're very interested in talking.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this on the panel at the conference, but the new atheist has been a huge benefit to the church.
Yeah.
Because people are suddenly actually buckling down and saying, "Oh, no, is what I believe true? Better check it out."
Yeah.
And then they do.
Yeah, I said several times, I think I've even got a blog post on, and I say, "Thank God for the new atheist." And I mean it.
Yeah.
They've done us a good favor, and I really think
fun, but it's also true.
I really think they've also dumbed down their own side, because the atheism of the past, it would be embarrassed by the new atheist today.
I don't know. Have you read Bertrand Russell?
Yeah, I have read, but I know many would be. I mean, Michael Roos.
He was like a new atheist.
I mean, Michael Roos, for instance, said the God delusion made him embarrassed to be an atheist.
All right, I'll give you that. Why I am not a Christian was slightly better than the God delusion.
I mean, when I read Dawkins, I could tell he really doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. And I think you could train a high schooler for about a year or so, and he'd be ready to take down Dawkins and the God delusion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got two aspects here. You've got a culture which has become relatively secular over the years. I mean, you look in the, 1950s or so, and you'll be like, "I'm a God-fearing Christian," which made you a good person. That statement alone gave you credentials as a productive American member, citizen, right there. That's why they were, quote, godless atheists. And then you have it drifting away from there. It starts to become uncool to be a Christian. And you can be a Christian in your own time, but you don't talk about it. And, you don't, and then kids start drifting. So there's a society moved to be less Christian, 50% or less, I would say. And then you have somebody like Dawkins comes along at a very appropriate time in the nation when we've just been rocked by crises by religious zealots. And, he writes this book saying, "Hey, here's what Christians believe." You have all these people who don't really know what Christians believe because they've never been to church a day in their life. And then they read Dawkins' book and say, "Is that what Christians believe?" And, suddenly they're as bitter towards Christians as everybody else. On the other hand, you've got people who come out of church, like we've been talking about, who've been not getting the meat at all, and they read Dawkins' book and they're like, "Yeah, that's exactly what we're like."
Yeah, I knew someone, and today he's a very strong Christian, but I worked with him in Knoxville. I worked at Walmart. He worked there too, and he went to a hyper-fundamentalist Bible college. I mean, King James only, the whole works, and such. And he and I were good friends. We'd get off work together, go play Smash Brothers and things like that.
University.
Yeah, that kind of place, honestly. Not that place, but that kind of place. But we'd go and we'd play Smash Brothers and things like that together. He thought I was sold to paganism since I actually read Harry Potter books, for instance. and that's the kind of world I was in. But we got along great. We were good friends. And then I go off to seminary, don't hear from him until a few years later. And he had joined the Marines, and he was having a crisis of faith because he'd read people like Dawkins and Hitchens, and he didn't know what to say to them. He wanted to believe, but he couldn't seem to find the evidence. And his world first got shook, he said, when he found out that the passage known as the Johannine Comma wasn't part of the original. And, I mean, to me, that would not be damaging at all. But for him, it was.
Sure.
And so he contacted me.
I'll tell you why in a second.
Yeah. He contacted me as sort of a last-ditch effort because he remembered I talked about projects. He didn't think it was anything worth taking seriously at the time, but he contacted me, and I guided him for months there, talking on the phone, answering emails, things like that. And I mean, I'd get worn out from it, because I was investing so much of it. It's because I'd spent years reading. I was ready, and I didn't give him pat answers. I gave long, written out, thought out answers. Like, for instance, once he came to me and said, Aquinas' argument from motion doesn't work because science has shown such and such. And I just said to him, you need to read it better and look at it closer. And on his own blog, he talks about how one night he was in bed next to his wife and he was reading it there. And he says, all of a sudden, it hit me what the argument was really saying. And then it hit me that it worked and that it's true. God is real, and he was right there, and he was present. He said he threw the book across the room and ran away as fast as he could at that point. And I didn't realize that until later on, until he wrote on a blog. But one day I also I saw an email from him, and it said in the subject line, Jesus of Nazareth. And I was saying, okay, here we go again. Let's see what it is. And I opened it up, and the email just said one thing. It said, he really did walk out of that grave, didn't he? And I just smiled so much. But yes, he did. Today, Roger is a very strong Christian, raising his kids Christian. But, if I had been there, what would have happened? And I don't mean that to boost me up. It means I was the only one in his life who knew about this stuff and could help him. How many other Rogers out there could there be that need to be reached but don't have someone like myself or you or anyone else in their life to help them? And if anyone's interested in the story, you can go to my blog, deeperwatersofprojects.com, the section, look for a blog post called Reaching Roger. And he was actually interviewed on my show by me to talk about his story. That's Roger Maxson is his name, but his story is really worth sharing.
Roger Maxson? Really?
Yeah.
I think I'm friends with him on Facebook.
You might be.
All right. Well, anyway. No. So here's the thing. I'm going to end up giving away all my research before I do the episode on this. But I have been looking into these Christians who became atheists. And I mean high-profile atheists. And I've been looking at their biographies. I'm not quite finished that study yet, but here's one thing that I found, is that one of the things that really impacts them is this sort of level of certainty. And again, every single one of them, without exception, came from a fundamentalist background, deeply fundamentalist. And there's a level of certainty that comes with that. You stroll into that church, and that scripture is inspired, meaning that every single word in your King James Bible was written down practically by God,
Just like Roger.
And as literal as it possibly could be. They'll give you that maybe the trees don't clap their hands, but that's about it. So you have this level of certainty, right? And I'll be 100% honest with you. I've had my foot in both pools. I grew up at a Christian school that was so fundamentalist. I didn't realize it until much later. So I'll give you an example. One of my Bible teachers said that books of 1st and 2nd Samuel were both written by Samuel. But didn't he die halfway through the first Samuel? He's like, it was prophesied by Samuel, all right? He was a prophet.
Wow.
Yeah, he said other things like, Moses wrote the Pentateuch, including the end of Deuteronomy where he died, because he prophesied it. That was his answer to everything. It was like, well, he wasn't there, and, he was dead. It was a prophecy.
Please don't introduce him to the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So at any rate, that's the kind of background I came out of. So I understand this. I get it. There's a level of certainty. You know what you believe is true. And it is 100% true, and everything that is taught to you is true. It's true truth, no question.
Right.
All right. So if you come out with that level of certainty and then doubts start to be induced into that, say the Johannine comma, as you mentioned, which for our listeners was a verse in John where, basically it spells out the Trinity word for word, So Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It was like three to bear testimony in heaven, isn't it?
Yeah, and these three are one. I mean, it's not a slam dunk for the Trinity, but it's pretty darn close.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of the King James thing. And if you look at the earliest and most accurate translations, it really doesn't say that. And, I think I remember a story about the translators deciding to keep that in because it was such a strong indicator of the doctrine of the Trinity. So it was a conscious decision on the parts of the people who wrote that translation. At any rate, so you got that. Somebody learns that, the fact that I just gave. And they're like, whoa. So you're saying to me that the King James Bible I hold in my hand has sections in it that might be misleading? Well, if it has one section that might be misleading, how many does it have?
Right.
And what I'm walking you through right here is essentially Bart Ehrman's story, which is he came from a very fundamentalist background. Every word had to be true. He ran into a contradiction. He was, stumbling around himself trying to resolve the contradiction. His liberal professor came in and said, well, Mark just got it wrong. Right?
Right.
And, this hits him out of the blue because I'm assuming as a fundamentalist that an authority figure speaks from pure authority. So his professor comes in and tells him with the authority of a religious teacher that there might be an error here. And that rocks him to the core. So he didn't instantly become an atheist at that point. Again, this is a trend you find in all these stories of Christians that became high-profile atheists, is that they went from extremely conservative, fundamentalist, to extremely liberal. So he took a swing towards liberal. He was still a Christian, but he was, poo-pooing all these contradictions and doubts that he had by ascribing to very liberal theology. And then the thing that tipped him over the edge, Bart Ehrman, was the problem of evil, like pretty much everybody. And at that point, he was no longer Christian. But, this is this absolute certainty. And it's kind of a safety net. It feels very comfortable in a hyper-fundamentalist environment. You know what you know. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And then you start getting doubts.
I know that Craig Evans has said that Bart Ehrman is still on a flight from fundamentalism to this day.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great point because Tyler always says it, that atheists are essentially fundamentalists. They're just swung to the opposite end. And I don't think that's a coincidence. From everything that I've seen, a lot of your really, really hardcore, 100% atheists came out of highly fundamentalist churches. And they never left the fundamentalist mindset. They just swung to the other end of the pendulum.
Yeah, they used to believe everything they were told blindly from the pulpit, from the pastor. Now they believe blindly everything they're told from the new atheist or whoever it is. That's why you have some even being like Jesus mythicists, for instance.
Yeah, and so it comes down to absolute certainty. That's fundamentalism is essentially is this idea that you are absolutely 100% on what you believe, and anybody who denies that's a heretic.
Mm-hmm.
And, you get the same thing in the New Atheist movement. You are absolutely 100% what you know, and anybody who denies it is a moron.
Mm-hmm. And I think also you have the thing going with so many of them that, they would rather commit ritual suicide, I think many times before admitting that there could be anything good or true whatsoever about Christianity or the New Testament or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, no, I mean, the proper attitude, in my opinion, and again, I came out of a really, really conservative Christian school and church, and then I went to a liberal Christian college. So I got both ends of the spectrum. I have feet in both pools.
Mm-hmm.
And, my opinion, which I think is backed by fact, is that, the best thing is to be, at the risk of being deceptive here, an agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
You accept a C.S. Lewison mere Christianity because the evidence overwhelmingly points in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
and everything else you hold open.
Mm-hmm.
I often say that I'm sympathetic to certain viewpoints on Christianity. So, for instance, ideas behind creationism or so forth. I don't hold firmly to one of them, but I can tell you which one I'm sympathetic towards.
Uh-huh.
For me, that works because I have in my mind something I'm relatively certain of. I can use as a framework to build, but if that gets knocked out of the framework, if I come to the conclusion that the evidence suggests that this is the wrong idea, I haven't lost my footing because my footing's not on that.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, it's a theory.
Mm-hmm. I have no problem with any of that.
All right. Well, is that your view, or would you have a slightly different one?
I tend to hold to mere Christianity as well.
Okay. Cool. And yet, Tyler's still a heretic, huh?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Just making sure I was still talking to the real Nick Peters here.
Yeah, I mean, that's your view also, isn't it?
All right, look. I affirm the virgin birth.
I also affirm the virgin birth.
All right, conversation done. Anything to wrap up your section?
Nope, that's about it for me.
All right. So that about wraps up for this episode of the Mention Rules podcast. Did you want to do your closing pitch there, Nick?
Yeah, if anyone's interested in my research, you can, the works that I've done such, you can go find me at deeperwatersapologetics.com. And I have my own podcast, the Deeper Waters Podcast. And of course, I affirm the virgin birth.
All right. So our ebook, The Mention Rules Project, is still available through Amazon for $3. Still pretty new and still doing extremely well.
And our thanks to Greg West for making it one of the top 10 apologetics deals on Kindle for 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, no, it's good, and it landed on another Twitter feed that's exclusively for Kindle, apologetics Kindle deals. So I saw that pop up on my feed as well. So I'm not just selling it because it's our product. Apparently, it's pretty good. Yeah, our first month's reports on the sales were very impressive.
Indeed.
So this book sort of came together by itself, didn't it, Nick?
It did, and we should do another one.
Yeah, I was like, hey, we should do a thing. And then, bam, we've got a book. And now you're saying we should do a thing. Who knows?
Yep.
I've got that list of 50 questions I've been pitching for, since the day we started. That's still sitting around somewhere. All right, we're kicking up the Mentionables media output now. Not only are we dropping a new podcast episode each Tuesday, but we're also putting out episodes of Mentionables TV, which we've shortened to MTV so as to avoid any kind of confusion.
Right. Yeah, there isn't an MTV out there already, is there?
Da.
Okay.
Our motto, by the way, is I want my MTV.
Hmm.
It just struck me that was a good motto.
Maybe we should play music on it every now and then, too.
Whoa. Like something about internet killing the video star?
Maybe. That'd be a good song. I bet no one's written that one out.
Well, they should. All right. Well, as far as the MTV, we're dropping a new episode on YouTube each Thursday on our own YouTube channel. And, of course, we'll promote that on our Twitter feed and our Facebook page. So, if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should be able to see it. And, Nick, you're telling me you're eventually going to participate in those, right?
Yeah, as soon as I get the moment to do it.
I know. The busy life of a famous apologist.
Yep.
We're also putting out articles semi-daily from various members of our team and of our network as well. You're a pretty prolific writer yourself, Nick, so I'm probably going to be pulling a lot of your articles on there.
5 times a week.
Yep, well, that helps. You can follow all that good stuff on our Facebook page or our Twitter feed, which is @mentionables1. Be sure to give this podcast a review on your chosen podcast app. Now, I'm not asking for a 5-star review, but last person who gave us a 5-star review received a generous blessing from God. So plant a seed.
And your teeth will be minty fresh.
It grooms your puppy for you. All right. And that will do it. Thanks for listening, and keep on mentioning.
Thank you.